I'm doing great as well. Let's start.
All right, let's start. So I gave Jyoti a list of questions backstage, and I'm going to totally change them and ask some others. Best place to start, Jyoti, would be just your background. Before we get into the app dynamics and all the success, I think it'd be great for people to hear your story.
Sure. My background, I grew up in India. My dad had a small business, what you call like a mom and pop shop. So I learned a little bit of business helping after school my dad. Went to engineering school, wanted to come to Silicon Valley, came to Silicon Valley, was kind of mesmerized by startups. So I said, let me go and work in startups. And I worked in a few startups. At some point, I was like, I should do, start burning with some idea to do something. And I ended up quitting my job and starting pitching to investors like you to take some money and start my own. That's my story.
And entrepreneurs come up to you all the time now. What's the number one thing that, in terms of advice, that people often ask you about?
It depends on what stage they are, right? So it's entrepreneurs in the very early stage. Fundraising is definitely one. It's like people go through a similar set of challenges. Like the very early stage, how do I raise funding? How do I find my product market fit? How do I, look for co-founders? Those are the topics. Once you get through those, then everything is a lot about sales. Almost like I would say 70% of the advice after that is about how do I build sales? How do I hire sales, VP of sales, salespeople, sales strategy, all that stuff. And then the stage after is a lot about actually personal development after that, like leadership. How do you grow yourself? How do you evolve yourself? Because that's what entrepreneurs have to go through after that. So it's really like where people are, but that's what people normally would ask.
So take us back then to the early days of App Dynamics and some of those early hiring challenges that you had. And what are some of the lessons that you would share with others?
Hiring is really hard in the early stage. Like, if you have to hire your first person to work in your team, second person, third person, fourth person, really, really hard. And one thing I learned is like, it's really, you have to make them believe in the mission and just have them excited about the mission, because it would never just be the financial part of it. And they're taking a chance, they're taking a risk, and you have to find the people who are excited about that. Like, they want to be like what I will tell people is like, if this, we're gonna work really hard to make this very successful and very big. And the way you make a difference in Silicon Valley is by being part of something as the first person, second person, third person, and really make it happen. And it's like, that's what will help in hiring. But hiring is not easy. And you have to spend a lot of time and energy. That's another thing I learned. And sometimes founders ask me, like, we are struggling with hiring our early hires, and tell them, like, it's not uncommon. Like, I spend 70% of my time hiring in the early days, because that's what it takes. You meet a lot of people, you ping a lot of people, and you just keep at it until you find the right people. You don't want to compromise. You want to find the right people. And if you did make a mistake, like I still remember our employee number 3, or like the third employee after me and second person and third one, we had to fire after 2 months. It was really, really hard, because it was the first time I was firing someone. I never fired anyone. But still, and he was the third person, but it was very clear not the right fit. So you also have to make sure that the early people are right fit for your team, your culture, your organization. Otherwise, things will fall apart.
And so 70% hiring, what would you say you spent the other 30% on in the early days?
The very early days. Once the hiring was done, then you switch your focus. Like, I always look at in the early days, I always looked at the startup building was kind of like a video game, right? So you play on one level, you figure out what are the key challenges, you die a few times, and you not like fully die, but then you figure out how to do it, and then you get to the next level, and there's next set of challenges. So for like AppDynamics in the early days, first set of challenge was raise some capital, and that's where 70% of the time was going. The second set of challenge was let's hire a founding team, or like a team of initial engineers, so 70% of the time getting there. Once that was done, then it was about let's find the product market fit, right? So 70% of time was going there, like, which is finding customers, talking to customers, pivoting on product, making the right decisions. And then you get to the next level, which is like, okay, now Let's find our initial customers, the first 5 customers, and the 70% of time start. So I always looked at like my job as CEO was, I need to look at what's the most critical thing for the company to get to the next level, and majority of my time has to go to that.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to unpack a couple of those
Sure.
things. The first is the fundraising. So knowing what you know now, here we are 10 years later, what advice would you give yourself going back to 2007, 2008, about how you would go about fundraising, even given some of the new dynamics in the market today?
Sure. Well, fundraising, when I started, so I was engineer turned first-time founder, and I struggled with fundraising in the beginning. I pitched to at least 20 VCs before I got my my first offer, and you were there, so you remember that part. But it's the story that what advice I give to myself and anyone now is like, it took me those 20 rejections to learn what are people looking for, to give me funding. And to me, it came down to those 3 things that people want to be convinced it's a $1 billion idea, and partly because that's how venture capital works. That is, you go big or go home. So no one wants to invest in something that they don't think it's a $1 billion idea, because very few things go big, and very few things go right. But they want to believe that if things do go right, there is a big idea here and big market, big possibility here. So that's one. Second is you have to show validation. Validation beyond what you're doing, like validation from customers, from market, from other people. So either you have traction already with revenue product, or you have some kind of testimonials or some kind of proof points, some kind of data points, because people want to feel, to know the data and validation on, is this real? Like what you are pitching, what you're proposing, is there real value to it? And third is, why you? A lot of it is selling yourself at that stage. And if you don't sell yourself well or your story well of like why you would win, because any good idea, there will at least be 3 or 4 startups, at least, maybe more. Why you would win in that? What's your differentiator? What's your competitive advantage? What's your unique value? And if you just tell those 3 stories, like why this, if everything goes right, why this is a $1 billion thing, what's the proof and data points and validation behind it, and why should someone bet on you to go after that idea in that market? That's my thesis now. That is really those 3 things. As an investor, what would be your thesis?
I'm doing the interviewing. Hold on. So how many people are founders in the audience? Just clap a little bit if you yeah. Excellent. So, one of the things that sometimes is romanticized on television, Silicon Valley, is the ups and downs. So you just talked about hiring and some of the challenges, firing early on, fundraising, hearing no 20 times. Clap again if you're a founder and you've had some up and downs in your, It's tough. And so maybe if you would just share, how did you deal with some of those ups and downs? Because I don't think you probably had to deal with as much no previously before that.
Well, so any founder that tells the story of many times companies get successful and people talk about, people think everything was right in those, or everything went well. It never happens, right? There are lots of ups and downs. The framework that I just talked about is what made me keep sane into this. Just let's say I'm doing fundraising and there are ups and downs in it, but you figure out, eventually you crack the code there. Then you get to for me, it's like any stage I went to, initially it was always a failure. Like fundraising, initially it was a failure. Hiring, initially it was a failure. Then product market fit initially, or you run into hiccups and failures, let's say. And then you kind of keep working at it, you get to the next level, and you keep working at it, you keep to the next level. It's you just one milestone at a time. You get one milestone at a time, and you will eventually keep building towards it. That's one thing. The second thing I learned is there's no point stressing over things you can't control. So it's the more time you spend stressing over things you can control and you can change, the better you would be through those downs. And then you can really focus your energies on those. It's a lot of times I see people just stressing over what you can't do anything about.
That's good advice.
That's all I'd say.
And so maybe share a little bit how your day-to-day changed. You had a great story for me once, the 4 applications that you used as a founder and CEO. and the time that you spent in each and how that evolved from the concept of AppDynamics, through to the success.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I started as an engineer turned founder. So I was writing a lot of code. And so I would look at like what are the top 4 things I would use on my laptop all the time. So there was my code editor. So that was one. As a founder, you are also managing finance and all that. So there was Excel as a spreadsheet. You do PowerPoints and pitches and messaging and positioning and those things. And so that's PowerPoint. And 4th was email, right? You communicate and a lot. And it's I always found fascinating like how it changed over time. Like initially it was like 80% in the code editor. And then over time it became like, more in PowerPoint, and then it became a little bit more in Excel, and then like it almost all became about email and communication, and right, so that it changes as your company grows. That's what happens.
So you're saying you wouldn't do well on the code test today?
I think I would fail miserably now.
I don't believe that.
Yeah.
Other area I think is relevant, particularly for the early stage founders. You're particularly good at the finding product market fit process. And I think you've learned a lot, first with AppDynamics and now with Harness. Is there any advice that you would share for the audience in terms of how to go about that?
Sure. I think that the 2 pieces of advice I would share, one is volume is your friend. The more people you would talk to, because what I've seen is like, and I made the mistake in AppDynamics early on, is that especially like in a place like, Silicon Valley, you go and find a few people who are friendly, or a few people you can talk to, or a few people your investors connected you to, and that's it. Like, and you talk to like 5 people, and you start forming your opinion on product market fit on those, and that you could easily be misled. So I think volume, as in the more you talk to 50, you talk to 75, that will average out, anything that could potentially mislead you, and you make the wrong choices, wrong decisions. That's one. Second is what is product market fit? My definition that I learned, and my advice to everyone is always like understanding the business case of why someone would buy. And if you very clearly understand why someone would buy your product, you have a product market fit. And it's because you start with a thesis on like, this is what we're going to build, and this is why people will buy it. And if you haven't validated, eventually got to the right thing. So I'll tell you the story in AppDynamics case early days. I would show our slides in some demo, and I would ask customers, what do you think? And most people would be, yeah, this is good, this looks good. And because no one wants, you're a founder, you're very passionate about your stuff, and no one wants to say in your face like it's not good. And it's very misleading, right? So I still remember like, I went to New York to visit a lot of large banks. Someone introduced me to like the large banks there. A lot of good meetings all day. Came back and I was like high-fiving in the office, like we had really great meetings with all these guys. And I sent them emails to follow up, and no one responded back. And I was like, what just happened here? And then realized like just people are too nice. Like they're not gonna, if I'm as a very passionate founder about something I'm talking about, my technology, my product, they're not gonna say in my face like they don't like it. And so then I started asking the question on like, would you buy the product? Instead of like, what do you think? Instead of that, just like, would you buy it? That was better, but still I realized like, from that people start getting this defensive shield, and they start negotiating then of, when you start asking them, would you buy? So the third question that I started asking, which worked the best, was what is the business case you will make to your boss to buy this? And once people would start articulating the business case, and the same business case you will start hearing, like in AppDynamics case, like if you buy AppDynamics, our time to troubleshoot when production problems happen will come down by this, and it takes us 5 engineers for 2 hours right now, and it will take us like 1 engineer for 10 minutes, and that would be my business case, right? And you start hearing that again and again, the same business case. That's when you know your product market fit. So it's but it is a hard thing to really find the product market fit.
Yeah, as an investor, I would say that is the single biggest reason I see most early stage companies fail, even those that have raised money. It's not that they don't have enough meetings, it's that they interpret the meetings the wrong way. They don't ask the right questions in a way that they really understand. Is there a compelling reason to buy?
Yeah. It's almost like, as a founder, you're already predisposed towards, you don't want to hear no, or you don't want to read no in between the lines. You want to read yes between the lines. And the customer you're talking to, they are too nice also. They don't want to say no in your face, and you're kind of, because of that, you are stuck in there.
Yeah. There's a great book, it's actually called The Mom Test, It's about a guy who built an iPad app, a cookbook actually on the iPad. And the reason it's called the mom test is because it completely failed. And he says, my mom lied to me.
Yeah.
He actually asked her, she's like, oh yeah, Rob, it's a great idea. And she never used it. And it's like, that's the reality. Your friends, they don't like to tell you no.
You should never ask your mom about your startup, your product. That's a bad idea. Doesn't matter how bad it is, she's going to like it.
So that's true. So tell us about what you're doing these days. You're a busy guy.
Okay. So I'm doing two things. One is I have after the AppDynamics sale to Cisco last year, the first thing I did was I tried to retire for about 6 months. And I did retire for 6 months and I realized it's too boring to be retired for too long. So I wanted to build a company again or build companies again because that's what I enjoy, building products, competing in the market and all that. So I started Big Labs, which is a startup studio where I experiment with multiple product ideas, multiple areas to research. And if something becomes very interesting and exciting, then we spin it out as a separate company. And we have only spun out one company so far. It's a company called Harness, which I'm co-founder and CEO of. It's in the continuous, the space is continuous delivery as a service, simplifying DevOps and software delivery. That's what we are doing. Early stage company, about 40 employees, but doing well. So that's my first job. My second job, where John and I worked together on it, we just announced 2 days ago. It's a seed stage venture fund called Unusual Ventures, where we're looking to redefine how we can help founders in that seed stage, like going from that zero just an idea to the first $1 million of revenue. Because going from zero to the first $1 million of revenue is all about how do you get the founding teams right, how do you get the product market fit, how do you get your first few customers. And it's really the hardest part. For any startup founder, that's the hardest part. And we want to build a platform to help people go through it in a much better way. So those are two projects.
Fantastic.
Right.
So we're getting the queue. There's about 5 minutes left. It's important. Thank you all for coming and listening. I want to make sure any questions that are burning that people want to make sure they ask Jyoti, they get a chance to. So please, anyone? Yeah.
First of all, thank you for your time. Both of you are very busy and were very wonderfully learning session. I learned a lot. I have a question regarding, are there particular segment in tech which you are interested to invest in, or open to everything, or the hottest topics, data science, AI? What is the area you are interested?
Okay, I'll take it. For Unusual, we don't have a specific area of interest. We look at interesting problem areas, exciting technologies. We are open both for enterprise and for consumer. And we do look for problems that could be big and could become good and exciting companies over time.
Yeah. Oh, the same question. That's great. Anybody else? Yeah, sure. You can yell. We'll hear you.
Yeah, thank you for a good presentation. So my question is about the vision you have. So you have an idea, a product in mind, and you start a business. Is it important to continue with that to the very end, or you just give your product to market and see how market responds and then possibly completely change it? Is that a good idea, or is it better to stick with the original idea you had?
That's a really, really good question. And that's actually one of the biggest conundrum every entrepreneur has to go through. Like how you have to have a belief in something. You have to have conviction. There is no way you can start a company unless you have conviction in something. But at the same time, you also have to have openness and flexibility to adjust and adapt based on feedback and based on what you see in practice. And there is no easy boundary towards it. If you have no conviction about anything, and you are like, I'm gonna go out and ask people what they want and we'll just build it, that is most likely you won't have a good startup, won't have a good company. But if you have a strong conviction when you're not going to adjust and learn and adapt, that's also a problem. So you really have to find a balance there.
Yeah, I would just add that I can't think of one, even the biggest success, where they hit the bullseye exactly right out of the gate. So the founders were always somewhat pragmatic, not dogmatic, and they took the feedback that they got from the market and they would make slight adjustments.
Question here.
Jaswant, and I have a question about that you mentioned that you failed around 19 to 20 times before getting funding. So what was the difference between the last pitch when you got the funding, and did you realize that this is the pitch, I'll get the funding after the pitch?
Sure. That's what I described in the three things I learned. So the pitch evolved. So one thing I did, and I always advise any founder is like, if you pitch someone and the investor is not interested, right, ask them like, why not? And many times investors won't give you a clear answer. And so you have to, no offense to like a seasoned investor there.
Welcome to the club, dude.
but you want to, and you have to project openness to clear feedback. The reason they also won't give you because they don't want to to give you they want to make sure you are open to feedback, right? So, but if you are open to feedback and you understand like what is not there or what are you missing, and you can learn and adapt from it. So that's what I did. Like it's like I had my 19 rejections, right? And I kept asking like what's missing, and someone will say, hey, you don't have enough proof points of your thesis, or like is it this seems like it doesn't seem like a big enough market, or so that's where I said, okay, I need to maybe find justification in my story, in my presentation, in my pitch on why is it a big market. And if people think of what is a proof point or data points, I need to find proof points. So I started working on finding proof points so that I can put them. And then also people would be like, for me it's like, you are a young guy in your 20s, first time founder, sole founder, why should we invest in you, right? And so I started making sure I tell my story of why should someone invest in me better as well, right? So you have to you have to learn. Every failure, every rejection in an investment deck should be a learning opportunity. And if you learn from it, you can get better and better. And at some point, it worked for me.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you, Jyoti, for all the good advice.
Right.
He's an unusual guy.